Hi, this is Annette at needlepointers.com. Do you have an heirloom or much loved quilt whose binding has frayed like this one? Frayed edges are a common problem since they get lots of wear and tear. But no fear, you can replace the binding with a new one. To repair the quilt binding, you have three choices. You can sew a new binding on top of the old binding, completely remove the old binding before sewing on the new binding, or partially remove the binding. In this tutorial, I will show you how to rebind an old quilt by removing the frayed binding and replacing it with a new one. To cut the binding from the quilt, you're going to need a straight ruler, also a square ruler so you can square the quilt, and a rotary cutter. Before you begin cutting off the binding, take a look at it. As you can see on my binding, this is about 1/2 inch, and the back of it is folded over probably about 3/4 of an inch to an inch. So I just wanted to make sure that I just cut off just the smallest amount along close to the binding edge. So what I did is I removed the stitching on the back so that I could fold this binding out and then just cut along very close to the stitching on the binding. Okay, I'm ready to cut off the binding. I've folded out the underneath part. That might not be necessary in your case. And then since it has a nice edge, and we want to make sure that we cut this nice and straight, what I am doing is with my straight ruler, I am lining up the ruler on the border edge, and you have to decide how wide you want it or what you're going to be cutting off. In my case, I'm cutting the border, I'm allowing it to remain 8 inches wide. And then just take your rotary cutter and begin to cut off the binding. Continue to do that and cut it off all the way around the quilt. When you get to the corner, use your square ruler to square up the corner and cut. Then continue on. Once you have all the binding cut off, now it's a good idea to either hand or machine baste along the edge of the quilt, holding together the backing, the batting, and the top. This will make it easier when it's time to apply the binding to the quilt. On this quilt, the same fabric was used for the border and the binding. I chose a fabric for the new binding that was intentionally different. This blue fabric. How much fabric should you purchase? To determine how much yardage of binding fabric is needed, use our handy quilt binding calculator. You will find a link in the video and also in the description section. After choosing the fabric, it's time to cut the binding strips. There are many different binding styles and techniques. For tutorials on different methods, head over to our quilt binding page by clicking the link in the description or video. For most quilts, binding strips are cut across the width of the fabric from selvage to selvage. I've decided to cut my strips lengthwise. So I am placing my ruler on the strips. I have it folded lengthwise, and it's actually 8 layers thick. I am then going to put my quilter's slide lock up against the ruler, press down on it, and the nice thing about the slide lock is that when you press down, it does hold all the fabric in place, and it does hold 8 layers. In fact, it does say that it can do 10 layers. I haven't tried 10 yet. And then cut the fabric. Now, since it's not quite long enough, I am going to have to reposition my ruler on the measurement that I want. Again, slide my quilter's slide lock up against the ruler, press down, and cut. And I have a nice long strip. I'm going to do that again and cut the rest of the strips that I need. After preparing the binding, attach it to the quilt using whatever technique you prefer. I am finished binding this 30-year-old beloved quilt. As you can see, for the new binding, I used a blue color and I sewed it on the front and then hand sewed it on the back because that's the way this quilt was originally done. However, you can put the binding on your quilt however you'd like. So to recap, what I did was I first cut close to the old binding along the edge. I then machine basted, but you can also hand baste it along the edge to hold the 3 layers together, and then I attached my new binding. If you have a quilt whose binding is frayed or torn, you can just rebind it. You don't need a whole lot of sewing skills, just basic sewing skills in order to do it. I hope that you enjoyed this video. Please like, share, and comment. Subscribe to our channel and follow us on Facebook, Twitter, and Pinterest. Also, visit our website, needlepointers.com, for lots of other sewing and quilting free projects and tutorials. While you are there, sign up for our newsletter so you don't miss new videos.